Hollywood legend Robert Redford, who will always be remembered, finishes his incredible life at the age of 89. His passing has caused sadness to splinter the film industry. On September 16, 2025, he passed away calmly in the comfort of his Utah home. An entire era was defined by him. His family and many devoted admirers were devastated by it. For over 60 years, he was more than just a movie star. He was a driving force behind the advancement of cinematic art. His performance in Ordinary People earned him an Oscar. Sundance, a place where movie aspirations might come true, was founded by him. He also made a lasting contribution to the history of international culture. There will always be memories of Robert Redford's performances. His films made people yearn for a magnificent age that has long since passed, and he was extraordinarily elegant. But there was a soul that had been wounded by horrible things underneath that radiant radiance. The awful losses, the wounds that would never heal, and the death of his oldest son. Time was not forgiving. The worst blow fate has ever inflicted is this one. It took away a hero who was both beautiful and sad, who handled loss with incredible composure, and who transformed his suffering into works of art that had a profound impact on others. The death of Robert Redford is not the only thing we are witnessing. It occurs when a landmark collapses. It's similar like extinguishing a spark that once illuminated generations. It is the stillness of a voice that once spoke of strength, love, and loss, and screamed against wrongdoing. Robert Redford's already depressing life has taken a turn for the worst with what happened to him. Millions of individuals are left gasping for air and grief as a result of the heartbreaking fact. Please click the like button to honor an icon before we go on our journey, someone who sacrificed all for the world, and now leaves a silence louder than the sound of fame. Robert Redford was considered a Hollywood legend by the world. However, in the start of his life, when everything was still very unstable, he was imprisoned in a tiny bed, his youthful spirit pulled into shadows that no one would ever see, and his small body crippled by polio. As though fate had already determined how much suffering a legend's heart could bear, darkness poured down on him like a silent verdict. Charles and Martha welcomed him into the world on August 18, 1936, in Santa Monica. During the Great Depression, when working families were still having difficulty, he was raised as the lone kid in a low-income household in Van Nuys. He discovered far too early how brittle a child's life may be. At the age of 10, he experienced the terrifying sensation of trying to move a non-moving limb, the crushing weight of blankets that looked heavier than bone, and the sting of disinfectant in the air. This occurred sometime in 1946. Afterwards, he recalled, "My mother wouldn't let me give up. I thought I might never walk again." Martha would rub his aching legs every night and murmur words of hope into utterly silent rooms. She taught him that being strong sometimes means quietly refusing to give up, rather than winning. The child who would eventually control the screen had to first control his own terror by the late 1940s and early 1950s. He slid into the orbit of a nasty crowd in Los Angeles, restless and resentful, drifting into reckless nights that were riskier than he realized. "I was always searching for something I couldn't name," he acknowledged after many years. Even though he was simply given a severe warning when the police stopped him one night for mischief and reckless behavior, the lesson was memorable. That was when he understood how close he had come to discarding everything, and the steady hand of a loving father pulled him back from a precipice that could have destroyed his life. He discovered getaways to prevent himself from slipping once more. The open sky that promised horizons, sketchbooks full of imagined lives, and the intense beat of sports that calmed a restless heart. He demonstrated his value by using a racket to warm up tennis great Pancho Gonzalez at the Los Angeles Tennis Club, a brief glimmer that suggested he might fit in, somewhere outside the forgotten nooks and crannies of a restless metropolis. However, fate had more in store for him. The most devastating blow of them occurred in 1955, when Robert was only 18. Martha, his mother, who had previously given his paralyzed legs new life, went into surgery and never came back. His world's light grew dark as what started out as hope turned into sickness. The loss was complete for the lone boy she left behind, a rift that went deeper than any sickness had ever caused. Charles, his father, never remarried, and the house was reduced to a shell, with her voice ringing in every room. All that was left was a somber youngster and a severe man, both of them restrained by quiet rather than comfort. That was the year the ground gave out for Redford. In a flash, the simple framework of boyhood collapsed. "It left me with a silence I could never fill," he stated. And as time passed, that silence persisted. It accompanied him into maturity, celebrity, and achievements that should have felt like wins, but instead bore the scar of a wound that no amount of achievement could ever fully cure. Extremes slashed like blades in the mid-1950s. He felt 20 feet tall thanks to a sports scholarship to the University of Colorado, but it was quickly taken away by excessive drinking. As though the universe had shut a door before he had even figured out how to open it, the humiliation of departing too soon was a stone he carried. He was on the verge of giving up and decided to go into exile. He lived simply while traveling across France, Spain, and Italy in his early 20s. He painted, drew, and walked for miles under strange sky until the inner turmoil subsided. Years later, he would remark, "Resilience is rarely loud. Fear continues to advance despite its many positive aspects." In his mid-20s, he returned to New York, bringing tools and wounds. Additionally, he had a strong faith in art, a discipline he had acquired on the courts and trails, and a secret promise that he would persevere and overcome the shadows when they returned. It was in this crucible that the tale we lament today started. It's a genuine childhood story, not a happy one, a body nearly consumed by illness, a heart shattered by loss and tainted. He almost wrote his ending too quickly because of his mistakes, and a realization that was gained the hard way, by being banished, enduring hardship, and being resolved to start over on your own. Robert Redford may have appeared to be just another young guy with lofty aspirations when he returned to New York in the late 1950s. In actuality, however, it was the final attempt of a person who had already suffered from disease, bereavement, and humiliation. Instead of killing him, the wound strengthened his will. Under the flickering lighting and the stench of wet pavement, he entered the winding city streets at the age of 22. He carried the weight of life instead of the assurance of youth. He was still grieving over his mother's passing and the embarrassment of losing a scholarship. He clung to brushes and canvases as if they were lifelines while he was an art student at Pratt Institute. After that, he nearly ventured to attend the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. Acting was just another difficult ascent, neither an epiphany nor a swift triumph. He nearly made it with little TV parts at the age of 24. The Twilight Zone, Maverick, and Perry Mason. They were barely making ends meet because there were so few jobs. However, it was clear from every word that he had not given up. Many years later, he would reflect and be honest. It wasn't exciting anyway. Staying alive was the primary objective. However, there were ironies in simply existing, because his greatest curse was initially the face that everyone would one day adore. Because of his flawless symmetry and golden hair, casting directors believed he was too polished or too beautiful to be true. In order to be perceived as more than weak or reckless, the boy used to fight. He now waged an invisible war to be recognized as more than just a face. The cage was constructed of gold. Later on, he told her, "You're inside, but no one thinks you belong." There was still a nasty tone to his voice. Because of his appearance, the artist was imprisoned in a horrible cage of beauty. Doors opened, then slammed shut. Then in 1963, the chains were broken. Redford played the lead alongside Elizabeth Ashley as the young spouse in Neil Simon's play Barefoot in the Park. And at the age of 27, he at last found a platform on which to express his true feelings. The wit, timing, and subdued emotion he displayed to the audience each night captivated critics. The play ran for years and was a huge hit. Redford, however, saw it as more than a victory. They got freedom. It was the first time they saw me. Later, he reflected, not just what I looked like. The crowd's acclaim was more than just compliments. It was confirmation. After a while, he came to realize that he was more than simply a pretty face. The cinema theater had to follow Broadway. In response, Redford entered the film industry. He began in lesser roles and progressed to prominent roles, demonstrating his growing strength. However, the hurt of being fired early persisted even as his career flourished. He made decisions without anyone knowing because of that wound. It inspired him to be self-reliant and take charge of things so that he would never again be mistaken for a superficial idol. Now that he is no longer with us, the irony seems so exquisitely lovely. The worst preconceptions were held about the man who would transform American film and open up new venues for independent viewpoints through Sundance. He began his ascent by combating these myths. Balance could be the key to such ability. Robert Redford gained strength over those years as he transitioned from the dim TV screens to the brilliant Broadway lights. Not a painting, but an artist who battled for every inch. Not a mask, but a genuine person. However, that was only the beginning on Broadway. The films that would establish his fame, disseminate his name throughout the world, and leave a lasting impression on future generations were in the wings. The surge went from unsteady to stratospheric, and things were about to get pretty interesting. It seems as though fate was inscribed in both fire and blood, and now everyone is grieving over his passing. The ascent to the top of Hollywood for Robert Redford was like a blazing light. However, beneath that luster were scars that were hidden from the applauding spectators, private altercations that were woven into the very fabric of his notoriety. He looked unreachable in the late 1960s and early 1970s. She crafted iconic images that defined a period and was one of the world's biggest stars. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid featured a Sundance Kid, the clever and cunning Johnny Hooker from The Sting, Bob Woodward, Barbra Streisand's boyfriend in The Way We Were, and Bob Woodward, the independent reporter in All the President's Men. On their own, these parts might have made them immortal. For Redford, however, each round of applause had its own significance. Even as everyone applauded, the bonds of fame, attractiveness, and expectation tightened, tempering each wave of applause. The look that millions of people adored was never a gift without a curse, he subsequently claimed. Casting directors previously rejected him because they thought he was too attractive. Even when he was doing at his best, he experienced the agony of doubt. Was he truly more than a photograph? More than a smooth, golden-haired man? It can be a gilded cage. You are inside, but no one thinks you belong, he stated. He seemed a little angry since he had spent his entire life trying to get attention. He often demonstrated that he wasn't merely a heartless idol, but rather an artist with conviction and emotion, since, even when he won, the ovation occasionally seemed doubtful. His work's core theme was that paradox. He carried that vicious conflict with him like a burden no one noticed, and the image that gave him opportunities also made people want to remove him. His appearance in The Great Gatsby didn't excite anyone. Reviews could never really capture the depth of the anguish. The public believed it to be an error. It served as a sobering reminder to Redford of the weight of expectations. The fact that a so-called golden boy could never fail was a horrible reality. But he refused to back down. Rather, he forced himself to take on more difficult and dangerous tasks, giving his all to films like All the President's Men, where fun was exchanged for reality, and cinema was not viewed as a means of escape. The process was difficult, and he was accused of being overly serious. He feared that by delivering the confrontation, he would alienate those who had come for the laughter. Redford, however, resisted. He felt isolated, like a soldier with wounds no one else could see. When he declared, "Cinema has a duty to reflect reality, no matter how uncomfortable it may be." The next thing that truly tried him was the crucible. He decided to oversee the production of ordinary people. According to those in the industry, a handsome main man could never possess the discipline and vision of a true director. On set, every day was like walking a tightrope as everyone kept an eye out for him to trip. Nevertheless, it resulted in victory. He was awarded the Academy Award for Best Director for his picture, Broken Silence, which broke the taboo of melancholy. For Redford, that Oscar was more than just a recognition. It was evidence that he was correct, that his years of uncertainty were past, and that he was a skilled storyteller who belonged both in front of and behind the camera. But he was even more hungry. He founded Sundance in 1981, which would go on to become the center of independent film. What is today regarded as a secure environment for intellectuals began as a feeble notion that was derided by doubters and lacked funding. It survived only because of his wealth and his unshakable faith. He was advised by his buddies that he was taking too many chances. Even though there were evenings when he felt like everything might collapse, he persisted. Not for himself, but for others, in order to offer the stage he had previously so valiantly battled for, and to create a safe environment where candid viewpoints could at last be heard. In order to give others hope as they travel a more difficult path, he gave up peace, fortune, and even friendship. Now he lives alone, much like a man who doesn't take the easy route. Accordingly, Robert Redford's heyday was never a mere glitz and glamour. It was bright with suffering, the crushing sting of expectation, the weight of beauty that frequently seemed like a prison, the exhaustion of constantly trying to justify himself, and the never-ending strain of creating a safe haven out of a fragile fantasy. Everyone witnessed the victory. Redford read it. Still, he gained notoriety for that battle. not only as a man who relished celebrity, but also as someone who embraced it, battled it, and made it into something enduring. The truth is more loud than ever as we grieve his passing today. The artist who demonstrated that the journey never ends, even at the summit, is what people remember most about a star. Ultimately, fire is the source of achievement rather than ease. Robert Redford's life was viewed by everyone as a Hollywood fantasy, a much more intimate tale of love found young, brittle beginnings, and a man who believed he had finally created a safe haven that no storm could destroy lay behind the dazzling premieres and loud acclaim. When he was just 22 years old and not well known, he married Lola Van Wagenen in 1958. She was a woman of steady grace and quiet genius, who became his refuge as well as his partner. They had little sparkle in their early years. They spent their nights pushing a few dollars as far as they could go, sharing vacant rooms with borrowed furnishings. They made agreements to one another in whispers at night that their only wealth would be love. Redford had experienced illness, the loss of loved ones, and the anguish of not knowing what lay ahead. He was surprised by those early years with Lola. When she was around, the outer world seemed to stop being insane. For the first time, he began to believe in permanence and the basic marvel of a family establishing itself. Others thought they were creating a Hollywood fantasy, but in reality, they created something more sacred and uncommon, a shaky sanctuary of love and defiance, as well as a vow to weather any storms together. Neither of them could have predicted the severity of the first storm. Scott, their first child, lived for only a few weeks and was quick and brutal. When he passed away, the brittle haven of safety they had created together disintegrated due to an indescribable sadness. A dense mist of silence enveloped the nursery they had created with nervous enthusiasm, filled with little garments and lullaby thoughts, the kind of silence that reaches deep into people's emotions, rather than merely lingering in rooms. Holding a child who was no longer there was painful for Lola's arms. In the past, she was a silent strength. It felt like a new wound that would never go away every time she looked at the empty crib. The same was true of Redford. He was aware that neither fame nor love could ever resurrect those past times. He would add, after many years, something like that never heals. You just learn to live with it. However, the reality was worse. The loss wasn't limited to him. The darkness that sat between a husband and wife at night when it was extremely silent, the artificial grins that failed before they reached his eyes, and the empty silence of mornings were all formed by it, which resided inside him. He would be viewed by the public as the Sundance Kid, an invincible man. However, he and Lola would always be the parents of a kid who passed away too young. Along with dedication, their love also carried the crushing weight of separation. Hope returned to their home like a shaky light in the wind when James Jaime arrived. But that light was usually followed by shadows. His body wasn't prepared for the world, and he was born prematurely. He was struggling to breathe. A victory is created out of suffering every day. Hospital corridors were used in place of playgrounds. He became accustomed to falling asleep to the repetitive humming of antiseptic machinery. His parents had to learn to read medical charts with frighteningly high numbers. Jaime made it through everything. He underwent numerous operations, therapies, and liver transplants. It seemed as though he gained strength from both his own will and the hearts of people who cared about him with every feeble recovery. Robert Redford's double existence was brutal. Under the bright lights of Hollywood, he wore the image of charm and power that the world desired during the day. Holding his son's little hand, he would sit in dimly lit hospital rooms at night and make promises he would not follow. It was like living under skies that never cleared. "You never knew when the storm would break," he stated to a buddy. Indeed, the storm broke. After decades of incredible fortitude, Jaime passed away in 2020 from bile duct cancer. His age was 58. Redford, an elderly guy who was already frail, was unable to cope with the loss. In addition to becoming a father, he must also deal with the harsh laws of fate as a man. As if the world had come full circle to reopen a wound that had never quite healed, Scott's childhood death continued to reverberate across the years. Despite the fact that two boys died in different circumstances, the awful quiet they left behind persisted throughout all of his triumphs. As a cinematic hero, Robert Redford was well known throughout the world. However, he had to bear a sadness that no accolade, commendation, or standing ovation could ever fully comprehend, since he was a father who had been harmed twice. His renown was a bath of light. However, there was a melancholy that was heavier and more profound than anyone could ever comprehend beneath that light. Even when things went wrong or it poured, Lola stood by his side no matter what. They went from being nameless and hungry youngsters to becoming well-known worldwide over their nearly 30-year marriage. While he traveled to distant sets in search of roles, a sense of purpose, and a larger-than-life identity, she protected his 4 children from the craziness of Hollywood. They had to contend with their separation, gossip, and the crippling burden of a public persona that left little opportunity for harmony within the home. However, even the strongest roots were destroyed by the harsh and unyielding passage of time. The anticipated respite finally arrived in 1985, after 27 years. Nobody was yelling, furious, or scandalized. All that was present was silence, grief, and the numb knowledge that 2 individuals who had once been each other's lifelines were gradually drifting apart. Redford lost more than just his wife in the end. He would have to give up the only place he had ever known that was safe. He never made disparaging remarks about Lola. Rather, he revered her memories and frequently referred to her as the love of his life. The partner who tolerated his absences, the lady who stood by him when he wasn't yet proven, and the one who bore the brunt of his burdens long before he received recognition and appreciation. But underlying that gratitude, which few people noticed, was anguish. Sadness for a man who discovered too late that distance, time, and desire are often stronger than love alone. The severing of that connection was the most painful loss he had ever experienced, despite all his accomplishments. Robert Redford was a rock star in the eyes of the world. However, he understood that not even the love of his life could withstand the storms that shaped him. Thus, he was still a wounded man at heart. In addition to the sheer number of fatalities, this period in Robert Redford's life is extremely traumatic, due to the stark discrepancy between public perception and reality. He won an Oscar for Ordinary People, commanded the truth as Bob Woodward, and walked across screens as Johnny Hooker with effortless elegance. Nevertheless, the man who performed such roles entered houses where the cheers were drowned out by quiet. He was simultaneously living in 2 separate universes. Camera lights illuminated one, while hospital lamps shaded the other. Many people adored an icon. His family knows a father who would comfort a frail child in whispers. Despite the difficulties caused by distance and bereavement, a husband silently keeps the marriage intact. No one else was able to quantify the strength that emerged from those hidden sufferings. His films were powerful because they were based on contradictions. There is light and dark, triumph and failure, joy and sorrow. Because he had experienced moments when grace seemed unattainable, he acted with grace. Redford demonstrated that resilience was more than just a slogan. It was a decision to persevere, to get back up, to create, even when it looked like everything was crumbling around him. After decades of love and dedication, he lost Scott. His marriage to Lola dissolved. He argued with Jaime for a long time, and he ultimately said farewell. They were no longer together, 2 people who once believed that love could overcome all obstacles. These are the things that have shaped who he is. They are not ancillary to his career. Hollywood will always get the credit, but the man, Robert Redford, is the owner of the strong, honorable, and sorrowful silences. Even though he is no longer with us, his greatest legacy endures in the stillness just as much as in the cheers. Robert Redford did not haphazardly enter into the relationships that were reported in the media during the years following the dissolution of his marriage. He took it carefully, trying to see if, after everything he had lost and endured, his damaged heart could still trust. Short bursts of warmth occasionally possessed their own truth. There was admiration and a fleeting moment of joy when he met Sonia Bra, whose artistry and fire matched his restless energy. He and Lena Olin had such a strong chemistry while filming Havana in 1990 that it felt like they were destined to be together once more. However, it was not as simple as the writing suggested. Some, like Kathy O'Ire, a costume artist, stood silently beside him and supported him when the demands of celebrity became too much. These ties were merely feeble attempts to close the gap between his current self and his desired future self. He wasn't failing at them. However, none of them made it out alive. He was bruised by every breakup, and the anguish of his marriage continued to haunt him like an unhealed wound. He added in private, "I always wanted love to steady me, but I also knew too well how devastating it is when it disappears." The most poignant story came from Jane Fonda, who had known him for decades. He had the ability to draw you in, but he always kept something back. as if he were guarding a door that no one else could enter. That distance was brought about by life, not by apathy. Redford had experienced the loss of a baby son, the protracted illness and death of a loved one, and the dissolution of the love that characterized his early years. Things that most people could not. After surviving those storms, you come to terms with the brutal reality that love has the power to either rescue or destroy you. You risk breaking it again if you try to get it. But he never stopped reaching. Behind the flawless portrayal of the Hollywood hero was a man who wanted a companion with whom he could enjoy the calm of the evening rather than the thrill of premieres. He occasionally found it for a brief period of time and other times for a long time. Every time it came to an end, it brought him greater understanding and sadness. What remained was the agony of flames that briefly warmed up before extinguishing themselves. Not rumors. His youth stemmed from his first marriage. His subsequent loves were genuine but imperfect, like brushstrokes. They were significant because they portrayed Redford as a wounded but vulnerable man, rather than an unbeatable superstar. Despite his sadness, this man refused to let defeat win, even if it meant being alone until the very end. Despite knowing that love might be painful, he continued to trust in it. He clung to the flimsy but unrelenting hope that it would also recover. Robert Redford had a lot of unique people in his life that made an impact that went beyond his notoriety. You can't merely discuss his accomplishments and contributions when discussing his life. The two people that affected him the most were Paul Newman and Natalie Wood. An ovation could never erase the void created by the deaths of two companions who entered the story at different times. In the early 1960s, when they were both young actors just beginning their careers in Hollywood and adjusting to the glaring lights, Natalie entered his life. They collaborated on the films Inside Daisy Clover, and This Property is Condemned. Initially, it was a professional partnership, but it soon evolved into a sibling trust, two frail individuals clinging to one another in a merciless field. Redford would later describe how her generosity helped him stay afloat during those uncertain years, and how she encouraged him as he was struggling to make the terrifying transition from stage to screen. She had a beautiful balance of strength and fragility that he would never forget. The call that broke him came in 1981 when he was at the top of his game. There are more questions than answers regarding Natalie's life's ending because she drowned when she was just 43 years old. For everyone, it was news. Redford had relied on the hard silence of a voice, the void where a friend's laughter formerly resided. Although he didn't discuss her passing much, those who knew him well were aware of the fog it cast, a harsh reminder that even the brightest lights can go out in a heartbeat. She remained lovely, youthful, and absent from our memories. Paul Newman's death many years later was a slower, deeper wound than Natalie's death, which happened quickly. The duration of that time increased. They were a perfect fit when they collaborated on Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. However, it gave life to something more extraordinary off-screen. Being brothers. They shared secrets over quiet beverages, raced vehicles, made practical jokes on one another, and laughed so hard it ached. Newman was more than just a colleague to Redford. He was the presenter who could discuss the peculiar isolation of celebrity without uttering a single word. Through the suffering and numerous more moments that no one else would ever witness, their friendship became stronger. But once more, time was unkind. Redford, who came when he could, was unable to stop the death of a piece of his own life, while lung cancer sapped some of Newman's limitless vigor. Redford, who was 72 at the time, expressed it best when Newman passed away in 2008 at the age of 83. Words stripped to their core. My life is missing something now. It wasn't a remark made in public. Rather, it was the candid admission of a man who had lost the brother he had chosen. It was two very different kind of loss, to lose Newman later in life, and Natalie in the middle of life. Initially, the brilliant light's shock faded too soon.